The night air cracked open with the sudden flare of red and blue lights, slicing across driveways and windows like a war siren in suburbia. Tires screeched against the pavement as two patrol cars swung into the cul-de-sac, engines rumbling with urgency. Neighbors spilled onto porches, some clutching coffee mugs, others raising their phones high, ready to capture what promised to be the neighborhood spectacle of the year. And at the center of it all stood Karen, arms crossed, lips curved in a smirk of triumph, as if she had just won some secret battle no one else knew was being fought. She pointed sharply toward the driveway where the wife stood, calm and composed, her hands loose at her sides. "There she is!" Karen shouted, her voice slicing through the commotion. "She's got a gun! She's threatening the community!" Gasps rippled across the crowd, a chorus of fear and curiosity. Mothers pulled their children closer, whispering warnings, while retirees leaned against fences, shaking their heads, wondering what kind of chaos had just landed on their quiet street. The patrol doors slammed open in unison. Two officers stepped out, hands near their holsters, eyes narrowed with intensity. Their boots crunched gravel in a rhythm that matched the pounding hearts of everyone watching. The tension thickened, pressing on the air until even the breeze seemed to stall. Karen raised her voice again, her words coated in venom. "Arrest her now! She's armed and dangerous! She's a threat to all of us!" The accusation hung like smoke, heavy and suffocating. Yet the woman at the center of it all didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she stood still, shoulders squared, her gaze steady and unbroken. The flashing lights painted her in streaks of crimson and cobalt, but her presence radiated a calm authority that seemed out of place in the hysteria. Neighbors whispered, torn between fear and awe. Every second stretched into an eternity as the officers closed in. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the static hiss of a police radio. Karen's smirk widened, convinced she had finally cornered her target, convinced she would see humiliation unfold in real time. But what happened next shattered every assumption. The woman reached slowly into her bag, eyes never wavering, and revealed the truth. When the officer's eyes landed on her badge, the impossible happened. They saluted her. The salute froze the cul-de-sac in stunned silence. But the story of how this moment erupted had been building for months. This wasn't just about one late-night call, or even about one smug neighbor who couldn't stand the sight of another woman walking freely. It was about an entire pattern of harassment that had festered under the surface of a community bound by bylaws, petty politics, and the hunger of a few to control the many. Karen had spent years patrolling the neighborhood with a clipboard and an eagle eye, looking for grass that grew too high, paint colors that strayed too bold, cars that parked an inch too close to the curb. But this time, she had decided to go further. She saw the wife walking from her car, the silhouette of her side holster faint beneath her jacket, and she didn't pause to wonder or ask. She picked up her phone and dialed 911, her voice trembling with a fabricated fear. "There's an armed woman in the neighborhood. She's dangerous. Send officers immediately." What Karen didn't realize, what made the stakes so much higher, was that she had just called law enforcement on law enforcement. The wife wasn't some reckless stranger waving a weapon. She was a decorated officer, someone who had stood on front lines Karen couldn't imagine, sworn to protect the very people who now watched her with suspicion. The irony was painful and poetic. Karen thought she was protecting the neighborhood from danger. Instead, she had summoned reinforcements to her own undoing. For the neighbors, this was no longer about rules. It was about identity, about who belonged and who didn't. Karen's move sent a chilling message. That authority could be twisted into a weapon against anyone who didn't know to bow to her control. And yet, standing in the swirl of flashing lights, the wife embodied a counter-message even more powerful: quiet strength, unwavering dignity, and the unspoken truth that service carries more weight than arrogance ever could. The stage was set. What came next wouldn't just expose Karen's obsession with power. It would reveal the true measure of the woman she had tried to break. And as the officers inched closer, the air brimming with suspense, one thing became clear. This wasn't going to be another petty HOA squabble. This was about to become a reckoning. Karen's reign over the HOA wasn't built overnight. For years, she had cultivated the aura of a queen ruling from her suburban throne. Every fence panel, every lawn ornament, every child's bicycle left out overnight passed under her watchful glare. Residents joked about her as the sheriff of suburbia, but behind closed doors, the laughter often masked real frustration, even fear. She began with fines, $50 for an untrimmed hedge, $100 for a car parked facing the wrong direction. Then came the warning letters, drafted in stiff legal language and slipped under doors like poison-tipped arrows. People grumbled, but most complied. That was her secret weapon, intimidation. If you pushed back, you risked endless paperwork battles, threats of liens, or whispered rumors that somehow always found their way to the next board meeting. Karen thrived on it. The power gave her life meaning. While others sought connection through community barbecues or holiday lights, Karen found her identity in confrontation. The HOA wasn't just a homeowners association to her. It was her personal fiefdom, and anyone who resisted her rules was an enemy. Her hypocrisy was legendary. She spoke of safety while ignoring her own reckless behavior, lectured about order while sowing division. She weaponized bylaws not to protect property values, but to elevate herself. Neighbors muttered that she was less interested in clean yards than in clean hierarchies, where she sat firmly at the top, untouchable. But arrogance has a way of breeding blindness. Karen convinced herself that her neighbors feared her because they respected her. She mistook silence for consent, compliance for loyalty. And so, when she glimpsed the holster beneath the wife's jacket, she didn't pause to consider context or truth. She saw an opportunity, a chance to display ultimate control, to force law enforcement itself to bend before her imagined authority. That's why she dialed 911 without hesitation. In her mind, the call wasn't an abuse of power. It was the ultimate exercise of it. She was certain that when the flashing lights arrived, the officers would drag her neighbor away in shame, and Karen would stand vindicated before the crowd. But Karen miscalculated. She forgot that authority isn't hers to manufacture. She forgot that truth, once revealed, cuts sharper than fear. And she had no idea that the woman she sought to humiliate had faced down far greater enemies than an HOA president drunk on her own ego. The seeds of downfall had been planted, and as the crowd gathered with phones recording, Karen's smirk betrayed her fatal mistake. She thought this night would cement her power. Instead, it would unravel it. To understand the force of that unraveling, you need to know who Karen was up against. The woman at the center of the storm wasn't just a neighbor trying to live in peace. She was a veteran of battles most people only see in headlines. Born into a family that knew struggle, she grew up with grit etched into her bones. She worked her way through school, driven by a relentless belief that service wasn't just a career, but a calling. When others shied away from the dangers of law enforcement, she stepped forward. When challenges mounted, she doubled down. Her badge wasn't a symbol of status. It was a reminder of sacrifice. She'd seen comrades fall, faced crises where seconds meant lives, stood in the middle of chaos, and held the line. Her calm presence on that suburban driveway was forged through years of training, discipline, and the unshakable belief that dignity was stronger than panic. Neighbors knew her as polite, reserved, always quick with a wave, but never boastful about who she was. She attended community events, smiled at children playing in the street, and paid her dues without complaint. To Karen, she looked like any other resident, a target to be controlled. To those who knew her story, she was something else entirely, a protector, a shield, someone who had chosen to stand between danger and the innocent. Her immigrant heritage made the journey even more profound. She had fought not just for her career, but for her place in a country that promised freedom and opportunity. Every obstacle she faced carried echoes of sacrifice. Family members who had worked long hours, communities that had struggled for recognition, the quiet resilience of those who came before her. That night, as Karen dialed 911, the wife wasn't thinking of revenge or pride. She was thinking of all the times she had been underestimated, all the times arrogance had tried to silence her dignity. And as the officers approached, she stood not as one woman cornered, but as the embodiment of a lifetime of service, sacrifice, and strength. Her story mattered because it reframed the moment. This wasn't about a neighbor accused of carrying a weapon. It was about a woman whose entire life had been dedicated to the safety of others, and who was now being targeted simply for being who she was. And in that truth, the seeds of her triumph had already begun to bloom. The air pulsed with tension as the officers moved closer, their eyes locked on the figure standing calm against the storm. Karen's voice, shrill with self-importance, cut through the night like broken glass. "Do your job, arrest her. She's armed and dangerous." The officers hesitated. Their training told them to assess, to read body language, to calculate risk. And what they saw didn't match Karen's frantic accusations. The woman in front of them wasn't aggressive, wasn't panicked. She stood with the stillness of someone who had nothing to hide and everything to reveal. Neighbors edged closer, phones raised higher, the glow of recording screens lighting up the street. Murmurs swelled into gasps as people debated in whispers. Was Karen right? Was their neighbor really carrying something she shouldn't? Or was this another one of Karen's crusades, fueled by ego and disdain? Karen's smirk faltered as the silence stretched. She jabbed a finger toward the wife, her tone hardening into command. "Why are you hesitating? Do you want blood on your hands? Do your job now." But the woman didn't flinch. She met the officer's eyes with steady calm, her voice soft yet powerful. "You should know exactly who I am." The words hung in the air like a puzzle no one could yet solve. One officer shifted, unsure. The other narrowed his gaze, sensing something deeper. Karen scoffed, mistaking their caution for incompetence. "She's a liar. She's dangerous. If you don't act, this entire community is at risk." The wife reached slowly into her bag, every motion deliberate, controlled. The crowd's breath caught, the air thick with suspense. Mothers pulled children behind them. Phones zoomed in closer, Karen's face lit with anticipation. This was it, she thought. This was the moment she would prove her dominance, the moment she would see her rival humiliated in front of everyone. Her victory seemed certain. But as the woman's hand closed around the item inside, a hush fell over the cul-de-sac, deeper than any silence before. Time seemed to slow, every eye locked on her next move. And as she began to pull it free, one truth was about to shatter the night, a truth that would leave Karen's triumph in ruins. The moment her hand emerged from the bag, the entire street seemed to stop breathing. For an instant, it looked like Karen might be right, that the call she made would end with an arrest, maybe even worse. Karen's grin widened, convinced she had cornered her target. Neighbors leaned forward, bracing for chaos. But then the truth gleamed under the flashing lights. It wasn't a weapon that the wife pulled free. It was a polished federal badge, the emblem of service and sacrifice, the very authority Karen claimed to respect, but had twisted for her own ego. The officers froze. Their eyes darted from the badge to the woman holding it, recognition dawning like sunlight breaking through a storm. One officer's hand, still hovering near his holster, dropped instantly to his side. The other straightened, shoulders snapping back with the instinct of training. And then, in a motion that stunned everyone watching, both men lifted their hands in salute. The cul-de-sac erupted. Gasps, murmurs, the shuffle of neighbors lowering their phones only to raise them again, desperate to capture this reversal. Karen's smirk collapsed into disbelief. Her face drained of color as the officer's respect for the woman she had tried to destroy played out before the entire neighborhood. The wife didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The power of truth had spoken for her. She let the badge shine in the flood of red and blue, calm and resolute. Her silence carried more authority than Karen's shrillest accusation ever could. One of the officers stepped forward, voice steady. "Ma'am, we apologize. You should never have been subjected to this." His words hit the crowd like a thunderclap. Neighbors exchanged wide-eyed looks. Karen stumbled, shaking her head, stammering excuses. I thought I was only trying to protect." But nobody was listening anymore. The narrative had shifted. Authority had been restored to its rightful place, and Karen's empire of fear crumbled under the weight of reality. The wife's calm gaze swept across the crowd, her presence commanding yet humble. She had faced hostility, false accusations, and the threat of humiliation, but in 42 seconds, the truth had turned it all upside down. And as Karen stood exposed, the neighborhood realized something they would never forget. Arrogance can stage a performance, but integrity always writes the final act. By morning, the footage had already gone viral. The grainy cell phone videos, shaky but undeniable, captured the moment of reversal in stark clarity. The flashing lights, the salute, Karen's face collapsing under the weight of humiliation. Uploaded within hours, it spread like wildfire. Hashtags ignited. Badge salute. HOA exposed. Integrity wins. Twitter feeds filled with side-by-side clips. Karen screaming for an arrest on one side, the officers saluting on the other. Memes exploded across Instagram and TikTok, blending outrage with comedy, turning Karen's smirk into a symbol of arrogance undone. Commentators picked it up. Local news ran the story under headlines like HOA call backfires, officer saluted instead of arrested. Talk shows debated what it meant for authority, community, and prejudice. Within days, national outlets carried the footage, framing it as more than just a neighborhood spat. It was a story about truth, dignity, and the misuse of power. Neighbors who had once whispered about Karen now spoke openly, emboldened by the exposure. Stories poured out of past intimidation, petty fines, fabricated threats. Her reputation, once cloaked in fear, dissolved under the bright glare of public scrutiny. Meanwhile, the wife became an unexpected symbol. Online, she was hailed as the calm storm, the officer who stood tall against both arrogance and falsehood. Strangers across the country left messages of gratitude, calling her a reminder that service and humility still existed in places of authority. The shockwaves weren't confined to the digital world. In the cul-de-sac itself, people walked with a new confidence, no longer afraid of the clipboard tyrant who once ruled their lives. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone could feel it. For Karen, the silence of her once watchful neighbors was louder than any headline. For the wife, the salute became more than a gesture. It became a symbol of vindication, proof that dignity carries further than fear ever could. The true power of that night wasn't in the flashing lights or the viral videos. It was in the lesson it carved into the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. Authority, when corrupted, shrinks under scrutiny, but authority rooted in service grows stronger when tested. The wife knew this truth long before Karen's call. She had lived it in every uniformed shift, every moment she placed herself between danger and the innocent. That badge wasn't a weapon, it was a promise. And in the driveway of a suburban cul-de-sac, that promise silenced arrogance in a way no shouting match ever could. The moral was clear. Dignity always outlasts deception. Power wielded for ego collapses under the weight of exposure, but power rooted in responsibility creates ripples that inspire. Karen had tried to weaponize fear. Instead, she exposed the hollow core of her rule. For the neighbors, the takeaway was simple yet profound. Never mistake silence for weakness, and never underestimate those who carry their battles quietly. For the viewers, it was a universal reminder that in every confrontation between arrogance and integrity, truth eventually commands the salute. The wife didn't need to lecture or celebrate. Her presence alone became the message. A message that spoke not only to her street, but to anyone who had ever been underestimated, targeted, or told they didn't belong. And as the cameras faded, the hashtag slowed, and the world moved on to its next headline, that message lingered. Respect isn't demanded by fear. It's earned by service. Karen called the cops, certain she had orchestrated her neighbor's downfall. But in 42 seconds, the truth shattered her illusion. What was meant to be a scene of humiliation became a scene of respect, sealed forever by the sight of officers saluting the very woman she tried to destroy. The lesson is clear. Arrogance can shout, but dignity speaks louder. Authority abused may win for a moment, but integrity wins for a lifetime. And in this story, that victory belonged not to Karen's false power, but to the badge that symbolized service, sacrifice, and truth. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that respect will always triumph over hate, then don't let it end here. Share it. Talk about it. Be part of the movement that refuses to let arrogance define our communities. Subscribe for more stories where justice outshines fear, where ordinary people stand tall against extraordinary arrogance, and where truth finds its way to the surface every single time. Because in the end, it's not about one cul-de-sac or one neighbor. It's about us. And together we can ensure dignity always earns the final salute.